I am super excited to be here with my good friend and colleague Paul Edwards as we talk about writing your book, getting to done, which is such an important topic. There are so many people we've found who begin the writing process, myself included, and never complete that, which is such a shame when you've got such valuable information to share. Paul, welcome.
Hey, Jason, it's so good to be here. So proud of all you've accomplished this year with your book. I knew you could do it, and we've got proof of concept, and I've seen this happen many times over now with people I've worked with in the past, and hate to see somebody get inspired to share an important message with the world and then get stuck because the process is overwhelming or there's too many unknowns. And that's what we really want to do is take away all of the unknowns and shine light on all the dark areas and light it up to show you there's really nothing to be afraid of. You just have to follow through with it.
Absolutely. There's a quote that comes to my mind, and I always forget who said it. I don't know if it was Van Gogh or something, or someone. And he said this. He said, "If there is a voice inside you that says you cannot paint, well, then by all means paint, and that voice will be silenced." And isn't that true of people who have a message they want to communicate through writing, and they say, "Ah, but I'm not a writer. I could never do that." And it's that voice that shuts them down before they've even gotten started.
We always fear what we don't understand. And a friend of mine, Dennis Volpe, who I've had the privilege of helping him with some of the stuff that he worked on, actually has a saying that goes, absolute clarity destroys ambiguity. And that's what I think we can help people understand through this is just to show them that there is a process, there are details, you do have a lot to pay attention to, but it's not beyond your capability to do it. It's just you don't know it, you don't understand it, but once you go through it and you do understand it, you'll come out the other end just like you did when you wrote your book. You're like, now I could write another one. I feel comfortable as a lot of that process that is no longer a mystery to me.
Absolutely, and I think the process that you and I went through, a critical part of my success in writing was the fact that I was aligned with an individual who was willing to coach me through that, get me through those sticking points. It's almost like a speed bump in the road, but that requires a certain activation energy to get over that speed bump. And simply because I've never been through that speed bump before, you were able to help me through that. And so we've broken this down into, I think, five critical areas. The idea of what's the best way to eat an elephant, one bite at a time. If we take this idea of writing a book, this monumental or seemingly monumental task, and break that down into its component parts, it becomes simpler. So we've got planning, writing, editing, publishing, and marketing. And today we're going to talk about the planning process and follow that up with future webinars on writing, editing, publishing, and marketing so that the people who have something valuable to say to the world can have an outlet through their writing.
Yeah, and a real important thing that I want to emphasize right from the get-go, real quick here as we move into it, is that while we're focusing on one phase and that phase may appear sequentially first in order, it's always good to have the others in the back of your mind as a constant reminder because it's very easy to lose track of important details that you want to have ironed out before you get to those phases because they do come in a linear sequential order when you go from first conceiving of your book all the way to publishing and promoting it.
Absolutely. And I do want to point out that if anybody's in a hurry throughout this 1 hour webinar, simply send us a direct message on LinkedIn, YouTube, or Facebook. I'm also going to put up a link to join our free community. The free community are creators who want to leverage their experience and their expertise using technology and marketing channels. And we can help you with that. So if you're in a hurry, get the replay of this webinar and future ones. Simply send us a message. There's no obligation, so don't get afraid that we're going to send you into a sales funnel. All right. Anything else before we get started, Paul?
We should just let everybody know that we are keeping an eye out. If you do have questions, you're free to enter them, and we will do our best to respond to them in real time. But we've got a lot to get through here, so it's gonna proceed at a pretty good clip. I better shut my mouth and we get started with the good stuff. So there we go.
All righty. So we're talking today about planning, and as you and I were conceiving of this webinar and having been through so many coaching sessions with writers and other content creators, I think the big question that came up in our mind that a person needs to really address is why do you want to write a book anyhow? And there's an idea that comes to my mind that if all you have is a hammer, then everything's a nail. And so a book isn't necessarily for everybody, but it is probably for many people. And so we broke this down into think two different areas. If you're writing a book, maybe you're a storyteller, or you want to be a professional writer, you want to motivate, inspire, or you want to leave a legacy, or do you want to sell something? And how does your book fit into your sales channel to move your prospect onto the next link in the chain in your sales channel?
Mm. Yeah, and by doing both of these, an important you don't necessarily would want to call this an objective, but it is a byproduct of of something that happens when you publish a book. I have found through the three books that I've published myself that when people discover that I'm a published author, it raises my credibility and authoritativeness, if you will, in their mind, even if they never read what I actually wrote in the book. And so, buttressing both of those, appearing in both of those columns, I would say, an additional objective that you could keep in mind is I want to increase how I'm perceived, not in a shallow, misleading way, but in a way that says, I don't just do what I do. I've written a book about it. I'm a subject matter expert. I'm authoritative. I can speak about this in front of the media. I can speak about it on stage, et cetera, et cetera.
Absolutely. I like how you frame that. For me, I find that there's an internal process of writing a book which leads to clarity of message. I have a lot of scattered thoughts, a lot of ideas, a lot of experience, expertise. How does that precipitate out of those clouds of thoughts in the sky? How does that precipitate out onto a page through a well thought out product? And that I think is a huge component of writing a book. It really does have a clarifying process for your message. And then on the outside, like you're talking about, when you are promoting yourself in the world, and I don't think promotion is a bad thing, and we can get to that a little bit later. But there's a lot of people poo-poo the idea of promotion. But I tell you, if you've got something profound that you want to say to the world, it is incumbent upon you to communicate that well. And when you've precipitated out of those, those ideas, those clouds in your head onto the page, a well thought out message, now you've got something that you can give in a condensed fashion, that instead of a diluted fashion to your target audience, they will walk away with something valuable. And then, like you talk about, what is the what how can you engage them in the future? What's maybe the next thing you want to do them, work with them, and that gives you, I think, like you talk about, also credibility because you've gone through the intense process of clarifying your own thoughts.
Yeah, yeah. One of the things that you and I discussed that I really think is important to emphasize, although we're already a few minutes in here, but I just want to emphasize you raised the really important point of where does this book fall in the chain that you're leading the reader through. Now, whether you're trying to sell something or whether you're trying to inspire and influence, the book always has to, there's a couple things. You want it to hit people where they are, right? You want that target reader to collide with that message at a place where it has an impact on them. And secondly, in some cases, right, it's instigating a mere beginning of a business relationship, right? You're in some cases, if you use the marketing funnel lingo, you're trying to get them in at the very top of the funnel. In other cases, you're sort of guiding them as they're midway through the journey. And in some cases, you might even be quite close to the bottom of the funnel where the next step is give me a call and let's set up a time to see if we can work together. So I think that that's a really important thing to emphasize, particularly about the why is yes, why? And more importantly, why are we broadcasting this particular message? Because if we're going to send a message that should be at the bottom of the funnel, at the top of the funnel, we're going to miss out. It's going to backfire. And so I think that was a really important issue that you raised.
One of the elements of writing a book, I think, as well, is something that you brought up as we were planning this webinar. You've got a book, I think, Influencer Marketing Secrets, and you talked about how it has no specific application in your sales funnel right now. However, it is a value add to anybody who wants to work with you. It is years of experience that you brought into a book. Hey, if you're going to work with me, here's a book of the things that I know. You will get value out of this. You can buy the book or you get it free when you work with me. I think there's if a person can't identify where a book is in a particular sales funnel or a chain of events in sales, it can act as a value add for anybody who works with you.
hmm Yeah. And that all comes with our second big key topic, which is knowing your audience, right? You have to know, you have to do the homework. And I think a lot of people, I run into a lot of people as a ghostwriter who come to me and they say, I want to write a book. And I say, okay, who are we writing to? And they have some sort of generalities they can speak about. Well, I serve this kind of client. Okay, but let's let's break that down and let's try and get a little bit more granular about it. Because to circle back to what the point you just made, if we're going to put the book, slot that somewhere in the chain, in the process that you're taking people through, we need to know where to slot it. So my old book, right, Influencer Networking Secrets, I use that to go to do speaking engagements. I don't use it as part of my funnel to attract new ghostwriting clients because, yeah, it's I do mention that I'm a ghostwriter in there, but it doesn't really talk about the process of writing a book, which is what that target client is interested in. They're not interested in how I got started in business, not as much as they are in what kind of product I'm making to the marketplace now.
Absolutely. Well, moving into this idea of planning, I think one of the things that we talked about, which was really important, is the idea of your support system, because you don't write a book in a vacuum. There
Mm.
are people around you who are instrumental in whether you will complete your book or not. And we've got those outlined in a couple different ways: champions, supporters, resistors, and bystanders. And then within each of those areas, or those individuals, we've we've outlined where they fit in the process of writing a book. So again, that process of planning, writing, editing, publishing, and marketing, the champion, supporters, resistors, and bystanders will play different roles in each of those. And I think, I know from for writing my book, this idea of champions, the people who really are in your corner, the people who will go to bat for you, who will keep you accountable, who have deep insights into who you are as an individual and where you're headed. They're instrumental in the planning, writing, editing, publishing, and marketing aspects of your book. Whereas if we move down the list, we might even have resistors who are part of our process, the people who don't love us and maybe actively push against us. We have something to learn from them in the planning and writing process because we have so much to learn from the people who don't do business with us.
Absolutely. My first book that I published in 2018 was a huge hit among my champions. They all turned out for a big book launch I did here locally where I live. Um, the first time I ever attempted to offer it to resistors, right? Not antagonists necessarily, but just people who don't know me, have no connection to me, could care less who I am, it fell flat. And part of the reason I when I look back on that is because I didn't really do any research up front to find out whether or not how resistors would respond to the message. I didn't even bother. I just wrote it, got it out there, got it published, and so it didn't do anything like I was hoping it would do. And that's just a that's this goes back to what we talked about at the beginning, where even though we're focusing here on the planning stage, you have to think like a marketer when you're writing a book. You have to be able to say, okay, yes, I think this is the message I want to write. I think this is the audience I want to hit. And I definitely know this is the response that I want from them. However, what's it going to be like for the perfect stranger? What's it going to be like for the person who has no dog in the fight, no real emotional connection to me, maybe doesn't even know me from Adam? And is there a way to find out how that person would respond?
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to take a brief pause here for those folks who are just joining us now on the live stream. We're talking about writing a book, getting to done, the 5 key processes in writing a book: planning, writing, editing, publishing, and marketing your book. We've got expert guidance here with the framework of many people want to write a book. They talk about writing a book. They may even start a manuscript and they don't get it done. I count myself among those individuals. And now that I have, successfully come to market with a book based on decades of experience and expertise, with my good friend and colleague here, Paul, who's a ghostwriter and also owns an agency that works with people who want to write their books in coaching or through DIY. We've we're unleashing some secrets here that we want you to know as part of that planning process. We encourage you to just take these and run with them. You can also join the free community. There's a link in the chat. And then if you have questions, feel free to drop those in the chat. We'll be happy to get to those as we as we move along here. But we are moving into the process of knowing your audience, which is such a key part of planning. Like we just talked about, not only for the people who are our champions, but even down the line, the people who are ambivalent towards us, the bystanders, the people who are just waiting for us to come to market with something, and then also even the resistors, the people who are who don't necessarily like us, perhaps. Uh, Talk to us about knowing your audience and the importance of that, Paul.
One of the things I really want to emphasize here, Jason, is something that you have a strong knack for, and that is simply digging into the data. Um, so much of the way I've guided clients up to this point has been on where can we look, even if we have to do a traditional focus group, but where can we look to find out what those people are already uncomfortable, unhappy, dissatisfied, uncertain, etc. about this topic. First of all, is it a widely searched topic? Do people actually even care about this topic? Do they look it up? And most of the people I work with, yes, they do because they're business owners. They serve a good portion of the marketplace. But how do they look for it? What search terms do they use? And you have a fantastic tool for that. The other thing I want to say is we have a bullet point there about integrating experts in your field into or in this in on the topic into your book. And I've done that with a couple of clients now. We've had tremendous success from borrowing on uh, a slightly different angle to give people a broader perspective as they read through the topic. They can see, I did one with a financial advisor and he brought in an estate attorney. And so now you can look at the same issue from two different angles and you see, this is why I really need a team to navigate this thing. And I shouldn't be doing it myself if you're the reader, right? So the experts you can bring in will bring anecdotal evidence. The research you do online will give you more of an empirical type of evidence based on the search terms, and I'd like to hear you talk a little bit about that, particularly on the search side.
Well, I'm a data junkie, and it comes from being a self-taught programmer for many years, and then working professionally in programming, starting e-commerce companies, and digging into data to understand customer behavior, because that drives, if we're selling a product, we can understand our customer behavior based on their search patterns, whether we are writing a blog online or whether we're creating micro content with facts and figures and answering questions via video or audio, or whether we're writing a book. I think it really is a question of data. And if we go back, and I would like to circle back to this idea of why am I writing a book? Am I a storyteller? Well, what stories are people engaging with? If you want to
Mm,
sell something, go find the people who engage with that and mirror and overlap that with the things that you know about and you can talk confidently about. And then if you are selling a product or a service, what are the key questions that people ask around that product or service? So if it's in writing a book, I know one of the key questions is why write a book? And it seems so fundamentally um, or so fundamental to, well, there's a lot of reasons to write a book, but people genuinely ask the question, why should I write a book? Is there any value in writing a book? If we're creating content about writing books, we should answer the question why you might write a book, because people are asking those key questions. A great place to start for that is answerthepublic.com. A lot of other folks talk about it as well. There are other SEO websites like moz.org. It's moz.org, and I can drop these things in the chat as well, or you can join the free community, and we've got the resources in there. But what I do, because I'm a data junkie, is I gather information from a lot of different resources, pull it all into a proprietary little database, and then I can score these things. So I can figure out there's a lot of searches and there's low competition. So here's a niche you might want to target that also overlaps with something that you are knowledgeable about, and
mm,
that it really does beat the idea of simply talking to the people who love you. Because I God bless my mother, but if I told her, "Hey, mom, I've got this great idea," it almost doesn't matter what the idea is. Mom will be super happy for me, and she'll be very encouraging. When in fact the marketplace may hate it.
yeah.
So I think it's really important that we use data, because the old saying, the numbers don't lie. We've got this information. We can get viewers buying, purchasing, searching, questioning habits. online, we can pull that into a database and then use that as evidence for why we might want to write around a certain topic.
Yeah, yeah, and I think we're going to find a similar pattern repeating itself as we move into the next phase, which is knowing your message. Because one of the things I wanted to emphasize, you and I were talking about this just a little bit before we got on, is often what is actually resonating with the public, or better yet, messages that are akin to yours, similar to yours, maybe at a level of 70% or better, sending essentially the same advice, wisdom, that kind of thing to the reading audience are already available for you to research. And you don't necessarily need any fancy tools, even. You can just go on Amazon and look up titles that are the same kind of book as yours if you look at the summaries. And then you read what the reviews. Now, some of the reviews are just, it's probably their mother, right? But some of the reviews will have comments going into detail about why it was helpful, what they emphasized that really was a huge takeaway for the reader, and that's another handy way of knowing. Oh, okay. So this message resonates strongly. This book is a top seller on Amazon for a certain period of time, and that data is all right there. Um, you don't necessarily like me. I'm not a data junkie. So but when you pointed it out that way, I've got enough intelligence to say, well, I could spend 30 minutes looking up titles like my book on Amazon and see what it was that made that book so popular.
Absolutely. And one critical point on this idea of reviews on Amazon, there are confirmed purchase reviews and then there are non-confirmed purchase reviews. And this gets into not perhaps so much for books, but particularly for products, and it does affect books as well. That a lot of times people will pay for reviews,
Mm,
which are not actual purchases, and it will change the ranking of that product or that in this case perhaps your book. So look at the verified purchase check mark. A verified purchase and a review with that is is more valuable than a non-verified purchase. And Amazon takes that in consideration with their ranking, but you as a book writer should be armed with that information before you simply, believe everything you read on the internet.
yeah, yeah. In
So
the
back to this idea
meantime,
of sorry, go
go
ahead.
I was going to say, in the meantime, beginning to get acquainted with the message you're sending. Again, there's that preliminary stage of research, but then an important thing that I have maintained with every client I've worked with is that people don't read books most of the time. There is a certain percentage of the population that's happy to read very academic or data driven books. So we're setting that aside as a perfectly legitimate and noble category. But generally speaking, for professional services and businesses that want to publish a persuasive piece of literature, the you're going to tilt heavily onto more like stories and parables and examples that illustrate your principles, which we call them core pillars in our insider lingo. But basically, they're those renewable topics that you can just keep going back to and talking about over and over again, and you never run out of good things to say about them. Right. And so, an example in my book is not for profit is for profit. So one of the ways that I became successful through networking was by participating in not for profits, and I can spit out a bunch of stories and give a bunch of examples of how participating in not for profits ended up being very profitable, even though I didn't go there as a salesperson or try to sell people, but I just ended up getting some tremendous opportunities out of it. And so everybody has core pillars like that, subjects that are renewable, and you can spin it a thousand different ways. And around that is what you start to take the stories, right? Each person is a living, breathing collection of story after story after story. And some of those stories go really well to illustrating that core pillar principle that you're trying to get the audience to adopt.
Absolutely. And there's something that overlaps between the audience and the message. So if we know our audience and we begin to research our audience and we say there are other people like me and I can inform those people because I think we all need somebody who is following us and we're leading, and then we also need somebody to lead us. A lot of times our books are written for the people who are following us, the people who want to be like us. How did you get to where you're at? What road did you travel, and what's the best way to get there? Write a book for that topic, if we're writing something in sales, perhaps. Uh, and that's important to look at. I think you talk about mirror audiences, right? So we can identify the audience of the people who are engaging with our content already, and then we can find other people like them, which also impacts our message. What message do we really want to inform them of? And I've got a key here that I always talk about, like this idea of look for the hell yeah moment. That when a person is reading your content or watching your stream or podcast or listening to your podcast, they go, "Oh my gosh, yes,
Yeah.
this is what I was here today for." If we can identify those things, I think we drive ourselves to further success. For me, I found that things tend to be, um, I tend to look at those types of things as though they are second nature to me. I usually find those hell yeah moments in my like in the second nature, because I am accustomed to those things. They are remarkable to somebody who's following after me, but they are not remarkable to me anymore.
Mm.
Just as when I am following somebody else's content, what they're talking about is somehow remarkable to me, and I guarantee it's not remarkable to them.
Yeah. Yeah. And what that was making me think of was when you have done the research, like we talked about in the know your audience phase, when you can even pinpoint down to the sometimes the verbiage, and I'll give you an example of this. When this is 5 years ago, I'm working out in the gym 4 to 6 times a week. So I'm saying I should be getting some results with all the effort and consistency I'm putting in. I mean, I'm every week for months and months and months. But all that's really happening is I'm adding body fat. I'm getting more and
Hmm.
more 20 I got up to 26% body fat. And I was complaining about it in a Facebook forum there where had a couple of friends one night. I was like, there's got to be more to it than this. It can't be just because my name is Paul Edwards, right? That's not a legitimate reason that I can't shed the belly fat. And it wasn't but a day or so later that I'm scrolling through my feed and an ad pops up and it says, "Men in your 30s, are you tired of going to the gym 4 to 6 times a week and not getting any results?" And I'm like, hell yes, I am. So, exactly what you're talking about there. You want to go for that hell yeah moment. You want to go for that moment where that person reading that book feels seen, like he's been reading my mail. Wow, this person
Absolutely.
knows me intimately.
Which is the idea of really knowing your message. The acknowledgement of the experiences, pain, hesitations, fears, complaints, problems, and what that big idea is. Many times that big idea is the hell yeah, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes the big idea is not necessarily revolutionary, but it's the thing that for that individual is second nature. But those pain, the hesitations, the fears, the complaints, when we're targeting our potential customer with our message, like it's you meet them exactly where they're at, and they're like, yeah, hell yeah, that's what I'm here for, which then encourages them to engage with your content, in this case your book, which then expands their mind into the big idea.
Yes.
After which,
Yes.
after reading this entire manuscript, they're like, I have a new framework for thinking.
Yes. Yeah, it's a version there of sell them what they want and give them what they need. And that same example, right? That ad that popped up, the first thing I did there was I bought a $47 fitness product. The next thing I did was I bought every book and fitness guidance information product that guy made out of his library. And before long, I was spending $1,500 a month on his mastermind. So sometimes, right, you have a high ticket offer, but you don't actually want to talk too much about that in the content you're putting out if you know the audience doesn't care about that. If I was frustrated working out 4 to 6 times a week in the gym and he'd offered me a mastermind, I would have said, "Pfft, what's that got to do with me?" But because he met me where I was, I followed the rabbit trail pretty much as far as it went.
Yeah, absolutely. Uh, Now, along this idea of knowing your message, we've got I love this quote from John Maxwell. Don't tell a story without making a point. Don't make a point without telling a story. People engage with stories. They don't engage with facts and figures. They engage with the story that is behind those facts and figures. And there's a great book, and I can't remember who wrote it, but Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow, or Thinking Fast and Slow. The idea is that our fast thinking mind engages with feelings and emotions and a storyline, and our slow thinking mind engages with facts and figures. And when we're moving a person through a sales process or moving them to a big idea, getting mired in facts and figures and details can be a detriment to us because it slows down the thinking process, and it slows down the engagement actually with the content. There is a time for slowing that person down, but you've got to put a story behind the whole thing, which gives you that arc that allows that person to engage more deeply.
Yeah, I just tell people, adopt the posture for the sake of writing of a storyteller, a therapist, somebody who wants to communicate in a not in an unintelligent way, but in an intelligent way infused with emotion. Leave yes, no, logic based questioning to cops and lawyers. Everybody else, right? You're writing a book. You have to engage with that person as both a spirit and a body. If you keep it at all the factual level and you don't tell stories, you know but by the same token, right, as Maxwell says there, you also got to make a point, and that's how we engineer every book that we work with clients, is we make sure you put that point right in the middle of the stories, and so it becomes sort of like a before and after photo, if you've ever seen like a Weight Watchers ad, and the person on the left and the person on the right are the same person, but something happened in between. What was that core pillar? What was the strategy that they used to flip the switch? That's what we want to emphasize.
Now, getting to this idea of message and these core pillars, there's a hidden in all these pieces of information that I've got there on the screen are some really powerful things that I want to call out. One is this idea of quotes, sayings, passages, historical examples. I have for many years curated quotes and ideas, and they are all sitting in a database that I can freely recall them based on topic, which allows me in any given situation, whether I'm doing a public speaking event or whether I'm doing a sales presentation or whether I am writing a book or giving podcasts or anytime I'm communicating, really, it allows me to pull up those principles, quotes, sayings, passages very quickly. My memory tends to escape me on details, and I'm really good at the whole arc, and I can keep a lot of disparate things together and move heading in the right direction as evidenced by this webinar. Uh, but when it comes to the details of writing, it's really important that I encourage anybody to start socking away those quotes, sayings, passages, other books that you are familiar with and have been influential in your life. Just start putting those into some sort of file, whether that's online in a database or whether it is on your computer in Notepad, some place where you can recall those things, that because those are instrumental, I think, when building into your core pillars.
Yes, and as you'll discover, as you and I discovered together, very often, even if those quotes are not in your database, we're going to mention this at the end, but I thought I'd sort of tease a little bit by saying, when you work through this process with a team versus in isolation, quotes that didn't occur to you will suddenly surface based on the interaction you have with your trusted advisors. And so if you're pushing a book towards completion and you're working through it in complete isolation, well, you can access the quotes if you know where to look for them, if you even know that they exist. But sometimes what ends up happening is, if you're working through it with a team and you're trying to convey a certain concept in a certain portion of the copy that you're writing, and that person is sitting across from you and say, I know exactly what you want. You want this quote, right? And or this reminds me of when so and so said this, right? And boom, you've got the quote.
Absolutely. And that's so important when we're looking at, again, as part of this planning process, putting together your team, like you talk about, because I don't think that anybody exists in isolation. Even the
Yeah.
people who claim to be an isolationist, they're not really. And particularly when we're putting something out in the marketplace, if we're developing that, it's really important to understand who is around us as, again, part of that support system, so that when we are writing our outline, or when we get into the writing process or the editing process, as we're talking with someone, I think not only our friends and family, but also key experts, they can help us refine our message and bring some of those stories to the forefront that we might not be aware of. It
Mhm.
expands our own understanding, which again, I think concentrates value into our writing, but then also it helps us with marketing and identifying who might be interested in what we're writing about, because we are now aligned with somebody else who has similarities to us, but there are some differences and other ways that they might teach us to engage that we were not aware of before.
Yeah. Yeah. You've mentioned before that you like to think out loud through things. And when we were working together, you found it very beneficial that A, I was experienced with book writing and publishing, but B, I was also loosely a target audience member. And so you could see whether or not what you had to say was resonating with me based on whether or not I fed back to you about it. And I think that's just something really important to keep in mind as we move into talking about what kind of response do you want. Um, it's when you actually have people responding to what you're saying, and you know that those people are more or less within your target demographic. It's a better sign than just sitting there in a room by yourself saying, I wonder if this is going to land well with people. It's better when you actually get real-time feedback.
Absolutely. And like you talked about, knowing your response, there's a something we put on the screen here. Lawyers are taught, don't ask questions you don't know the answer to. And the point of that is, in our writing, we want to be painfully obvious with what our intended point is. And because we're talking specifically, I think, right, about writing a book that is part of a sales process. It is moving somebody on and in influencing their thought processes. We're not, I think, specifically talking about writing the next Harry Potter for just people to enjoy. We are talking about people who have some sort of offer. We want to inform our audience, and the intended point, the next step, the response should be so painfully obvious after we've gathered all of our information and put that down on paper, and our prospect has read through it, that it's a no brainer. They want to take the next step because, like that first point in here, sales are just links in a chain.
Hmm.
We meet a person, which then encourages them to go to that next link in the chain, which might be going to our website or to sign up for an email list or engage with our videos, which goes to a next link in the chain. And they gradually get to know and like us, which over time builds trust, which over time encourages them to do business with us. So we want to think about our response as part of our writing process so painfully obvious that they want to go to that next link in a chain.
Yeah, and it all goes back to the what we said at the outset and what we've said throughout the process. The research in this never stops. I was thinking as you said that about one of my favorite videos to watch on YouTube, which is Ray Lewis and Ed Reed, the two Hall of Fame Baltimore Ravens defensive players, teaching a group of like high school aged football players how to study film. And at one point, Ed Reed stops the tape and he says, a lot of people uh, watch somebody make a big play in football and they think, how did he make that play? It looks like he's guessing. And then he says, he's not guessing. He studied and wrote down and reviewed and talked it through with his teammates and reviewed it and reviewed it and reviewed it again until he knew it so well that there was only one response he could give when he saw the play happen before it happened. He was ready for that play. And that's the same sort of um, thing that we're talking about here. You're when you talk about making it painfully obvious, the person reading your book, the target reader, if you've done your homework and you've paid attention to the details of your message, that target reader should think, of course I'm going to sign up for this course, or of course I'm going to contact this guy, or of course I'm going to join this community. I feel like I'm finally seen, like I've found home, right? I found what I was looking for. And the way that that happens is through careful, meticulous preparation ahead of time and constantly returning to and reviewing that data to make sure that the message you send answers those pain points.
Absolutely. One of the key points I really want to call out here in terms of knowing your response and writing and planning is something that you and I talked about, and it's not specifically in this webinar. We will address it later on, but in coming up with the content for this webinar, thinking the whole thing through, there's a point on here where it says talk about repurposing content into lead magnets, giveaways, excerpts, micro content, tripwire products. We have repurposed so much of the content generation process back into micro content for use across social media. These
Yeah.
clips, the important clips, the highlights between all the other valuable content that we've produced have been reproduced back into video clips, which as part of the writing process, a person really can gather that depending on the tools they're using. They can do it either easier or harder, but they gather that information back into micro content or excerpts for use across their sales funnel as they're
Yep.
seen in other uh, in other outlets, other media outlets, and other media channels.
And I was amazed in real time, Jason, because I've put out plenty of content in the past, and it gets a decent response. But we had a really positive, overwhelmingly positive response from several people. I asked them. I went out of my way to tag them in a comment and say, "Hey, was this helpful? Did you find it useful? Was it?" And they said, "Absolutely, it was." And we also saw quite a few people signing up and registering for it, uh, who we we weren't sure how this was going to go. We were just following the lead that we felt and being faithful with it. But it did its job because there were people signing up for it that I was like, I know who that is, but I didn't send them an invite. So they must have come across the content. They must have seen it in the news feed and said, "Oh wow, they're going to do a webinar," and that just goes to show that when you think through all of that data and all of that anecdotal evidence and all of the details of what you really know ahead of time, and you make it available in little snippets like that for people to get people's curiosity up, it works. It really does.
Absolutely, I totally concur with you because in this idea of being painfully obvious with your with your response, the next step you want your prospect to take. I look back on the process of finally writing a book, after several decades thinking about it, and coming up with short manuscripts and writing a lot of blogs and doing a lot of public speaking in the meantime. Uh, Pulling that all together, as we have talked about what critical content to put in this webinar and what we want to present as part of this training, I look at each of these pieces, I'm like, "Man, I wish I would have thought that through. I wish I would have just known that little tip, that little trick, because that would have made a difference." Because again, as we're looking back across this idea, and again, for our new viewers and listeners to this webinar, thanks for joining us. We're talking about writing a book, getting to done, because there's so many people who want to write a book, or they want to start a business, or they want to start a podcast, or they want to start selling online, or they want to do this. You hear them at parties. "Hey, have you ever had an idea about such?" "Yeah, I have. Absolutely. I would love to do that." And so many people miss the part of following through and getting to done because they there are speed bumps in the way. And it's just, man, if I could just get the information or the energy to get over that speed bump. A key part of that is looking outside of oneself to experts, people outside of our perhaps our friends and family who are well-meaning but don't have experience and expertise in a lot of the areas that we need to get to done. So when we're looking at this webinar and the idea of planning, writing, editing, publishing, marketing, breaking these sections down into actionable content, it it gives us that activation energy to get over those speed bumps to get this project done. And even if we break it down and a person wants to DIY this themselves, do it yourself, write and publish your book. It's totally possible. The
Yeah.
difference between those who do and those who don't is those who do, do, and those who don't, don't. It really is that simple. Ironically, we're always looking for inspiration and motivation from someplace else, but a lot of times it's just like, "Hey, you know what? I know I need to engage. Just go ahead and do it." There's really nothing stopping you, and all of the impediments are a lot of times are in our minds.
Yeah. Yeah. And as you like to say, right, an awful lot of the rules are made up. And there's nothing wrong with even starting out the way I did. I did a DIY book. I didn't really do a whole lot of research. I just wrote about what I knew. I could break it into several topics. I had enough of that to go on, and I got a good experience out of it. However, um, I look back on it same way you did about your earlier projects, and I say, there was an awful lot more homework I could have done about that. Maybe I could have taken that book somewhere uh, quite a bit further than I did, or who knows what would have happened. As it is, it's turned out to be a great learning experience, and as it is, it's led to enough bookings and engagements that just there's sort of that baseline of either you have a book or you don't have a book, and that can often mean the difference. But the further you want to take this, and the more you want it to really act as a link in that chain that leads that target client or customer or donor or shareholder or whoever you're trying to reach to an inevitable conclusion, the more granular you got to get with the data, the more you got to really take the time to understand where is that person. And therefore, do I write a manifesto or do I write a statement, right? And so, with the way offers have evolved in my agency, we've started saying, well, in some cases, what you really need to do is write a single issue book as opposed to an entire thing. There's ways to do that too. The point is, how seriously do you want to take it, and what's the objective here? If you're just looking to get your feet wet, I wouldn't recommend. I would recommend going on a shoestring for a DIY there. But if you want to make an impact, if you want to get results, if you want to see the kind of uh, feedback loop from publishing a book that you've heard about that actually does work for some people, that actually becomes a bestseller, becomes, a cultural phenomenon, becomes very influential. There are books out there like that. I mean, we could name off the titles. There's a different quality and a level of research that those people go to in advance of publishing that book.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that everything comes in its time. I'm a pretty firm believer in that. And even the decades of experience that I've had with starting, running, operating businesses, coaching hundreds or maybe a thousand entrepreneurs or more by now, and going through the process of a lot of public speaking, a lot of writing, and now bringing that into a culmination of my first book, I can tell you that none of that experience is wasted if we choose to bring that into the forefront. And I want to wrap that back around into this idea of knowing the response that you want your audience to take, this idea of identifying centers of influence in your network who have content outlets, audiences that fit the profile. Because, again, in my decades of experience, I've known a lot of people. I've connected with thousands of people globally on LinkedIn, many of whom will take my call. And so I have content outlets. I've got audiences. I've got people who care about me as an individual and care about what I have to say. And so do you as a potential writer. I want to encourage you. There are people who you are already aligned with. And if you get out there and talk to them, they will give you access to their networks if you have something valuable to talk about. And if you don't, then reconsider what you're doing with your life anyhow, is to put it bluntly. Uh, but if you have this idea of I really think that now is the right time to write my book. I got to get a message out there. It's incumbent upon you to take that to the next step and talk to somebody who has done that before. The
Mm,
fastest way to get between point A and point B is to find the map of how to get to point A or from point A to point B. And the people who have traveled that path before know the map. I'm a fan of DIYing when you can. I'm a pretty smart guy. I've done a lot of different things across a lot of types of businesses in all sorts of areas, technology, marketing, sports, fitness, all sorts of stuff, e-commerce. Um, and so I can DIY a lot of stuff. And yet there are times when I'm like, you know what? The fastest way to do this is to go engage somebody who's done it before, because I know that it's going to take me days or weeks to come up to speed on something. And even then, I'm going to cause myself problems, unnecessary errors, and cost myself potential revenue or time. And it's better that I reach out to somebody who knows what they're doing. And that also, I think, is as part of writing a book and knowing the response you want your audience to take. uncover those things that are painfully obvious to you now. Hey, engage an expert. What I don't know what it is for a potential writer, but be painfully obvious with the message you absolutely know from your years of experience you want your audience to take, because it is absolutely in their best interest.
Yeah. So with that, Jason, we also have a response that we've become pretty clear on. And the first thing that we want to do for anybody who's watching is provide reinforcement for the message that we've brought today. And so, why don't you bring up that slide? I'm eager to tell people what we're putting together here for in the Thinker Growth community. First thing we want to offer to you is a free global community. This is based on Facebook. And when you're there, you're going to get community support. We're going to be putting out content regularly in there. And this is just going to be a great source for you to return to over and over again as you work to create and manage and sell your expertise and experience.
Absolutely. I'm so excited about the Thinker Growth community on Facebook because I've got years of stuff that I've done, and I'm itching to get it out there to people, because there's so many people who engage with me and just like you, who ask specific questions and I help them individually. I'd love to expand that. And so, in terms of the content that's out there, we're starting with Write Your Book, but we've got content around hosting a webinar, starting a podcast, starting to sell online, launching a website. There are very specific things that people can do. Just engage with experts. And then you can see how all of those things fit together when you have a message that you know in your soul you need to communicate. Again, it
Hmm.
is incumbent upon you as a creator to get that message out to the community. And you can do that more easily with people. Sorry, I'm coughing.
He's just come down with a bug, everybody, but it's incumbent upon you to do that. And one of the best places to start is surrounded by other people who can support you through that, which is something we are going to be offering through the Thinker Growth community.
Which ironically, just as you picked up that message, which we didn't plan, when I'm under the weather, you can pick up and run with it. And that is similar to how we can do that in writing or publishing or speaking in that Thinker Growth community. So join that on Facebook. Look for Thinker Growth community on Facebook. And then, Paul, why don't you uncover this book strategy series and then the idea to done 18-week coaching?
Yeah, sure. And also, we've left a link in the comments in the chat for the Facebook group. So just head on over there and become a part of the action. The next thing we're going to emphasize is a strategy series. And so I've had a number of calls like this with potential authors who it's surprising how the process repeats itself. You come to somebody gets on an intro call with me or Jason, and they have a whole bunch of jumbled ideas in their heads, right? And they feel like, I can't make head or tail of this, and I haven't got time. Yeah, it's like, okay, let's get on a scheduled devoted time for 90 minutes, right? This is for one call. And when you walk away, we will have a draft outline, you'll have a reader's journey roadmap, and you'll have some core pillars knocked out. So you know what your renewable topics are, you know who you're after, you know what message you want to send them. I mean, you have at least a draft, right? Can always refine it, can always change it, can always go back to the drawing board, but you have something to go on. Well, recently somebody suggested to me, why don't you do a strategy series of 3 calls, because then you can take people through the before, the during, and the after. Each phase of writing a book requires attention to different details, more on some, less on others. And so which ones are we going to emphasize? So we're going to expand that into 3 90-minute strategy sessions. We are going to do the reader's journey roadmap. We are going to iron out your core pillars. We're also going to help you with organizing how to write your chapters. And then we've got an abundance of resources for DIY publishing and some great ideas for you to focus on marketing throughout the process of your book, so you don't leave that important step behind either.
Absolutely. There are things that people can do now in this, age of technology and communication and connectedness globally to get some of this work done on your own. And that might be that absolutely might be the solution for you given your situation. But we can exchange again, I think, for a perhaps a better result by engaging with experts. And so we've got those 3 different levels to join the free global community, the book strategy series, which is that 3 the 3 90-minute strategy calls. One thing that Paul and I are both great at is taking taking what could be nebulous concepts and distilling those down into something that's hyper valuable for you and for your audience, and then you can take those and run with it. And then I've been researching tools and techniques for, it seems like, forever, and I have quite literally a database of all sorts of things that I've tried and tested, which is an homage to the nerd in me. And I love to pull that I love to pull that guy out sometimes and say, "Hey, here's all the things I've done." But it can be very valuable in really distilling down all the different options, plethora of different options that are out there, and pulling those into something that you can do yourself. And then that idea to done 18-week coaching, I've been through it. Paul's super effective in that. And uncovering, again, the planning, the writing, the editing, the publishing, the marketing. If you're ready to get something done for your book, it's time. It's time to do something different than you've been doing if your book isn't done. And I think that that is, pretty shamelessly engaging with experts who have been there and done that.
Yeah, and just as this will bring out the nerd in Jason, it will also bring out the overly empathic uh, superpower in me, which is that I hear what isn't said and what isn't written. And so our process that Jason and I went through together for writing his book was very much, not all the time, but quite frequently, was about thinking about other ways to say the same thing that landed a lot more thoroughly, that gave a verbal uh, existence to something that we felt the reader would really want to hear, and yet wasn't said in the first draft of the manuscript. And so as we went back and forth, there's a lot of that needs to be pulled out. And this is the part of the work that a machine really can't do. You need, when you're crafting this message, there are shades to it. There are angles to it that are not seen. It goes back to what I said about recruiting experts into your message, but it also goes back to how much your team, the people who surround you to help you get it done, participate in that. And so with our 18-week program, you get some really imaginative and experienced sets of eyes and minds and hearts looking at and analyzing and thinking about what you're saying and amplifying the message and blowing it up, putting it on blast in a much more well-rounded way that lands on the paper very smoothly.
Absolutely. So I encourage everybody who's watching this webinar, if you're ready to engage or if you just like to ask some questions, you can direct message either one of us on any of the platforms you're watching this video right now: Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube. We've got the Thinker Growth community. It's live right now. We'll be adding content to that and engaging with you on there in an effort to help you be as successful as possible. Again, I'm convinced that if you have something that is valuable in your heart and mind to speak out into the world, it is incumbent upon you to develop that message as best you can, communicate it as best you can, and we're happy to be a resource for you. I'm going to leave those next steps up on the screen for the next minute or so, and we would love to have you join us later as we talk about writing and then editing, publishing, and marketing your book. Write your book, get it done. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.